Good morning. Thank you for coming today. I'm David McMillan. This is Samuel, Saul, and David, our 8th lesson. Before we begin, let's have a quick word of prayer. Father God, we love you so much. We thank you for your presence in our lives. We thank you for the wisdom contained in your Bible, the book that you've given us. Help us to study it and learn more from it. Be with me as I try to present it. Guide the words of my mouth, help them to be clear and understandable, and be with us all, help us all to learn. Pray all this in your Son's name. Amen. All right, today's lesson is titled, How the Mighty Have Fallen. Before we get too far in the lesson, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. It's not really that big a deal, but y'all may have noticed every other week when I come into work I come in from work. That's my point. Every other week I come in wearing scrubs, and you may be, well, he's probably going to work after church. The truth of the matter is I'm coming to church from work. I work overnight, and so I knew at the start of this, when I was going to be teaching these lessons, I thought, well, that might be particularly challenging. I work a 7-day week, 12-hour days. I work 84 hours in a 7-day period. Normally, I've been doing pretty good, I thought, but last week was a little more challenging than others. But if you'll be patient with me, as you have been, things will be great. So just FYI, when you see me in black, say a little prayer. Say, hope his mouth works well. All righty. Well, what do we have up on the screen? Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted, Matthew 5:4. I've noticed one thing about the study of David, that you can kind of take the whole Sermon on the Mount and use it every week if you wanted to, because almost every illustration used in the Sermon on the Mount is in the story of David. But being as the Sermon on the Mount is rather difficult, to say the least, I'm just going to bring up this one this week. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And then, to me, the pairing verse is John 1:35 or 11:35. Jesus wept. I always like Jesus wept. The thing I like about Jesus wept is you can, no matter what translation you use, it's Jesus wept. It's the one all the translations can agree on. Why is Jesus wept important? Why is that? What is important about that verse? I'll tell you what's important about that verse to me. It means that Jesus, of all people, understands death, what happens. He understands that, but he also understands loss. When he came to earth, he understood loss. He understood mourning. He understood what it feels like to lose a loved one, and he reacted by weeping. I think that's pretty amazing. I don't think it's just a little insignificant detail. I think that's important to remember, that the Son of God shed a tear after someone died. And, he knew that he was going to raise him in just a little bit, but he still shed a tear. So I think that's important to remember. Now, here's our review. I want you to go ahead and read that if you weren't here last week. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it. I am going to ask that you indulge me a little bit. The start of this lesson will be a little bit different. And part of the reason it's going to be a little bit different is because there's one aspect of the Old Testament that I've never quite gotten over, that I have a real hard time with. And I don't know if you feel this way as I do, but there's one aspect. And that is, why in the world do the Israelites in the Old Testament constantly worship the Baals and the Asherahs? Why is it that they constantly go back after times of peace and prosperity? Why is it that they always turn away from the Lord? And I was thinking, I can't think of any modern example where people en masse turned away from the Lord. And so I did a little research, and while this may not be a perfect example, it's a very interesting example, and I think it's something we can relate to, because something that's happened in the last 100 years. Uncertainty. When you hear the word uncertainty, what does that bring to mind? Is uncertainty, how many of you that's your favorite feeling, is a feeling of uncertainty. Raise your hand if you love uncertainty. You think uncertainty is awesome. Right. Uncertainty is interesting. It's an interesting word. We use that word, all of life is uncertain, right? I mean, do you know what's going to happen tomorrow? If you do, you're not being honest. Nobody knows. But we use that word uncertainty. What do we use it to mean? Well, we mean when we say the word uncertainty, we know that something's coming up, something that we don't know when it's going to happen, but we've had clues it's going to happen. And it can either be positive or negative, but we don't know and we don't like waiting. Well, were there periods of time like that in the history of the United States? Specifically in the history of Oklahoma, for sure. Well, I'm going to kind of put some pictures together here, slowly. That's a mom and the little baby there. That's a fellow rolling down the road and those aren't storm clouds, that's black dirt in the air. Here's some more black dirt in the air. Black as night, the middle of the day. Little fella there, can't hardly breathe. Here's a family trying to get to their house. What am I talking about? Of course, we know what we're talking about here. This is the Dust Bowl. Ran all the way from here to there. It was particularly bad in Oklahoma and Texas panhandles, where the most erosion occurred. They say in some areas up to 75% of the topsoil went into the air. A certain amount of Oklahoma got up and went into the air and made it all the way to the East Coast. This is a picture, everybody may remember the one from Time. This is Migrant Mother, I think, or Migrant Woman. But if you want to think about uncertainty, look in those eyes. In those eyes, that's uncertainty. And I know this happened a long time ago, but every time I look at that woman, I just feel for her and her babies. And I think, that was rough. More than 350 homes were destroyed after a single storm. This is Oklahoma Panhandle. This is Texas Panhandle. For those of you who don't know your recent history, Texas really wasn't settled in the Panhandle until after 1880, largely. Oklahoma around the same time. Sooners got here a little earlier. But, we didn't become a state till 1907. When does this happen? This happens in 1930. Anybody remember what happened in 1929? Great Depression? That was kind of bad, right? But then you top onto the Great Depression, you add the Dust Bowl years. Heavy in 1935 to 1940, starts in 1930. So this area's been settled for 50 years. These guys come here to make homesteads. They come here to make a new life for their family. And what happens to them? Well, they don't get any rain. They plow the fields. The fields dry up. There's nothing closer to a biblical event that's ever happened that I know of. A lot of strange happenings happened during this time. For those of you who don't know anything about it, I'm just throwing a few little facts in there. How many of you knew that there was a plague of rabbits? The rabbits came out of the holes. They didn't have anything to eat. Rabbits were everywhere. Grasshoppers got hungry too. Used to eating the grass. Now there's no grass. Livestock slaughtered wholesale. The government actually ended up buying heads of cattle for $1 each just to kill them and throw them in a pit because they had too many cows. Pigs as well. It was a crazy time. 500,000 people homeless, and 3.5 million people moved out of the Plain States. Now, you think, well, that's mainly farmers. No, actually, it is mainly farmers, I guess. It's almost 50% farmers, but the rest of them were just regular people that didn't farm. They just came to service the farmers. I thought I'd end it with this one because this is sort of how it goes. Whenever you're in bad times, you see something that just makes you think things can't get worse. You see an advertisement that just sort of, sticks it to you. What do you do in times of uncertainty? Where do you go? What's the first thing you think of? I want you to consider that because it's an important thing. Why did I bring up this time in history? All I mentioned is uncertainty. What does that have to do with the Bible? At this time was the only time I know of that superstition kind of took a hold. And it was not unusual for people to take a snake, a dead snake, stick it on a fence post, trying to gather rain. They would do anything they could to get it to rain. The guy who invented asphalt offered to pave over northern Oklahoma and the Texas Panhandle. He didn't get the contract. It would have cost a lot. But they tried everything they could. They tried snakes. They tried modern technology. And what was the answer? The answer was it was just going to be bad for 10 years. I mean, and there were good people there. Those were God-fearing people. Those are people who went to church. And did they get the answer they wanted? No. But did it drive some of them from their faith? I'm sure it did. And it drove some of them to superstition. And anything they could find. So when we think about, these Israelites are always going to the Shearers and the Baals, it has nothing to do with me. We have ancestors, that's just, it's almost 100 years now, but that's just a generation or two for most of us. I figure most of the people in this room have farming relatives, at least both of my parents were. And it just kind of brings home the point that the people in the Old Testament weren't so terribly different than the people now, okay? Let's go on to our story. We'll have a lot of story. I'm going to do my best I'm going to try to speed through David so that I can get to Samuel. All right, sorry, having some issues again. I'm going to speed through David so I can get to Solomon. One of the reasons I want to get to Solomon is because I think it'd be neat to end this thing on the temple because the temple is something really cool. And if I can get that far, we'll do that. But today, we're going to kind of speed through this. Now, Samuel had died, and all of Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had put the mediums and the necromancers out of the land. Saul did something good, right? Who thinks that mediums and necromancers are something that God likes? Right? Okay. Mediums and necromancers are one of the few words that God says he hates, he detests, it's awful. So Saul did something good. The Philistines assembled and came and encamped at Shunem, and Saul gathered Israel. They camped at Gilboa. Now, if you want to know where most of the battles were fought, almost all the battles are fought in this general area because the Philistines occupied the plains area of the coast. They would go up through here, through the passage, through the mountains, and attack here in the plains areas here between mountains. And they were trying to get to this area here mainly because this is really part of what they call the Fertile Crescent. So it's really the most fertile and productive land in Canaan. That's what they were trying to get to. So they traveled all the way from Aphek up here to Shunem. Israelites were here at Jezreel. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. When Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by Urim or by prophets. Then Saul said to his servants, "Seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her." And his servant said to him, "Behold, there is a medium at Endor." I always wish it wasn't at Endor. I always had a different impression of Endor as a child for some reason. I'm not going to mention that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. So Saul disguised himself and put on other garments and went, he and 2 men with him. And they came to the woman by night, and he said, divine for me a spirit, and bring up for me whomever I shall name to you. Now, she thought it was a trap to get her killed, but she assured her it was not. Why did she think it was a trap? Well, because Saul had made a law against it. Here we see Saul, when he's making a law, at least he's making a law that follows the Levitical law or the law of Moses. That's good, right? Even the mediums knew about it. But obviously, it wasn't enforced very well because his servants knew there was a medium just down the street. Then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? He said, bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. It's not clear how she knew that. The king said to her, do not be afraid. What do you see? The woman said to Saul, I see a God coming up out of the earth. He said to her, what is his appearance? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is wrapped in a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and paid homage. And Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Saul answered, I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me. And God has turned away from me and answered me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have summoned you to tell me what I shall do. Saul was facing uncertainty. He faced a lot of uncertainty in his life. What happens when Saul faces uncertainty? He makes the wrong decision every time. And you know, we've been talking a lot about spiritual discipline, or if you're a spiritual enthusiast, that is what I was thinking. That might be a way of saying it. You have to learn to rely on the Lord. You have to learn to rely on the Lord. To me, one of the things about uncertainty, the times of uncertainty, it's like God is whispering in your ear, do you trust me? Do you trust me? Because it's, who do you trust but God, right? When you don't know what's going to happen, is that what comes to your mind? Or do you think, there's got to be some way to fix this? Because that's what Saul's thought was, there's got to be some way to fix this. But what you got to do is you got to turn to the Lord. Even if the Lord doesn't answer you, you still have to turn to the Lord. You have to trust in the Lord. And Samuel said, why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. The Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hand of the Philistines. Obviously, the weirdest thing about this story, Saul ended up getting the Lord's message by the devil's means. This, of course, angered the Lord. You know, if he hadn't gone to the witch of Endor, would he have died that night? I don't know, but it was a decisive moment. But let's take a quick pause and go to a more uplifting story that happened just a little bit before. The way the Bible lays it out, this is sort of, they're all interspersed. Now David and his men came to Ziklag on the 3rd day, and the Amalekites made a raid against Negeb and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire, and taken captive women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. We recently found Ziklag, or not too unrecently. So this is actually Ziklag, a pretty nice little farm town. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's 2 wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. It was a distressing time, and David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. This is a time of uncertainty for David too. This is the first time all of the people that were traveling with him turned against him. They spoke of stoning him. That's got to be one of the worst parts in his life. And who did David have to turn to? No one but the Lord. In the past, he's always had someone there to help him, to strengthen him. Jonathan was tied up with the war. Abigail was captured. And he strengthened himself in the Lord. And David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. So Abiathar brought the ephod to David. And David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake them? He answered him, pursue, for you shall surely overtake and shall surely rescue. Good news for David. So David set out, and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Bezor, where those who were left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and 400 men. 200 stayed behind because they were too exhausted to cross the brook Bezor. That's the brook Bezor. They found an Egyptian in the open country and brought him to David, and they gave him bread, and he ate. They gave him water to drink, and they gave him a piece of cake, of figs, and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit revived, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. David said to him, to whom do you belong, and where are you from? He said, I am a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite. And David said to him, will you take me down to this band? Swear to me by God that you will not kill me and deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you down to this band. That's what he said. And when he had taken him down, behold, there spread abroad over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil that they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. The Amalekites had gone on a pretty good raid. And you have to remember when they were doing this raiding, Ziklag is a Philistine city. So they thought, well, I'm going to get this from the Philistines. So they got a little from here, from there, everywhere they went. And David struck them down from twilight until the evening of the next day, and not a man of them escaped except for 400 young men who mounted camels and fled. Now, after this was over, there's a lot of interesting Bible. I really suggest you read the whole thing because there's some details in here I'm leaving out. But some of the corrupt men said, hey, they did not want the men who stayed behind to get any spoil other than their wives. It's like, hey, you just stayed behind. You didn't do the fighting. I did the fighting. That's my stuff. But David said protecting the baggage was a job too, and that they would split the spoils evenly. And this became policy. It's an interesting policy. It's like everybody has value, right? Even if you can't be the one that's fighting. You have to remember these 600 people weren't 600 fighting men of David. There were 600 people that were following him. They weren't all fighters. Some of them got tired crossing the brook. And so he's trying to say, you've been with me, you've been loyal to me, and that's of some value to me. And gifting plunder to his allies where he stayed was also a great idea. So this became policy, not just now, but later when he became king. On to the first story we talked about. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan, first son, Abinadab, second son, and Malchishua, third son. The sons of Saul, the battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was wounded by the archers. Now, if you remember, when I covered 1 Samuel 14, one of the things I think when they have in Chronicles is kind of interesting. One of the reasons it's important to read Chronicles when you read Samuel is that Samuel can leave out some detail that Chronicles covers. Chronicles is sort of an effort to cover some detail that Samuel left out. But in 1 Samuel 14, it only says that Saul has 3 sons. And it calls them Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchishua, although Abinadab is another name. If you go to 1 Chronicles 8, it mentions Eshbal or Ishbosheth. Now, was Eshbal or Ishbosheth really his name? I don't know. Ishbosheth means man of shame. Would you name your son man of shame? Or Eshbal means man of Baal. Would you name your child man of Baal? If you're an Israelite? Probably not. But that's the name we have. So, here's where the fighting took place. Israel retreated till Mount Gilboa. On Mount Gilboa, the 3 sons of Saul were overtaken. Then Saul said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and mistreat me." But his armor bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword, fell on it. When his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died. Thus Saul died. He and his 3 sons and all his house died together. Now, leave out a little detail. You can only imagine what the Philistines did after they killed the king of Israel, is they realized they have a prize in their hand. Let's celebrate this. Let's make sure everybody knows what's going on. So they took their bodies, they desecrated them, they hung them up for everyone to see. And it was just part of the tragedy. They also took over all that lovely Israelite country, and they lived there. One thing about this, anybody remember from a long time ago, the first story Saul ever had, he rescued Jabesh Gilead from a fellow, Nahash the Ammonite, who was going to poke out everybody's eye. And that's over here on this side of the Jordan. So, while this part was occupied, up here, up to Bethshan, all this good land, Jabesh Gilead was over here. So, when all of Jabesh Gilead heard that the Philistines had all that the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and took away the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons, and they brought them to Jabesh. And they buried their bones under the oak in Jabesh and fasted 7 days. This, of course, here's the thing about David that I think is probably the most amazing. The Bible tells us that, the man looks at the outward appearance and the Lord looks at the heart. But one thing about David as a musician, a lot of times musicians lay their heart out into their music. And certainly when he wrote this about Saul and Jonathan, you can read a lot of in between the lines here. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. You daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you luxuriously in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Saul was the Lord's anointed, and David knew that. Saul had so much respect for God. He loved God so much, even though Saul was a jerk to him 99 times out of 100, especially in the last several years. Did David choose to remember him that way? No, because he was the Lord's anointed. He's going to remember somebody by the good things they do, not by the bad things they do, because the truth of the matter is we all do bad things. And I just think that there's a lesson for us there, that David was never bitter about this. At least here. After this, David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah?" And the Lord said to him, "Go up." And David said, "To which shall I go?" And he said, "To Hebron." And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. When they told David, "It is the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul," David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, "May you be blessed by the Lord because you showed disloyalty to Saul your Lord and buried him. Last week we talked a lot about all these sons that were born to David in Hebron. Once he became king, I believe he took this time to become a father. And he also took time to say thank you to the people he needed to say thank you to. But is that the end of conflict for David? Of course not. But Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. And he made him king over Gilead and the Asherites and Jezreel and Ephraim and Benjamin and all Israel. So if you're just reading Samuel, you're going, well, who is Ishbosheth? Yeah, that's why you have to read Chronicles. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned for 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. So he became king over in Hebron during this time. They propped up Ishbosheth on the other side. They hadn't won over Abner yet. Abner, the son of Ner, the servants of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. So Gibeon remained the capital of Israel, the northern province. Hebron was the capital of Judah, the southern province. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and the servants of David went out and met with them at the pool of Gibeon. And they sat down, the one on one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. One thing about Joab, which we'll learn, is he has the instincts of a killer. He's a very brutal guy. I believe Joab's one of the people that he met when he was on the run, when they said people that were bitter in soul. Maybe that was the kind of guy they're talking about. Joab is the commander of David's armies. We'll see, and it's because he has a good instinct for fighting and killing. So, and Abner said to Joab, "Let the young men arise and compete before us." And Joab said, "Let them arise." This is kind of a gross little story. But then they arose and passed over by number, for 12 for Benjamin, and Ishbosheth the son of Saul, and 12 of the servants of David. And each caught his opponent by the head, thrust his sword in his opponent's side, so they fell down together. Therefore that place is called Helkath Hazarim, which means a field of sword edges, which is at Gibeon. I added that, which means a field of sword edges, but that's what that particular phrase means. It's a strange war game, but it's what they did. And the battle was very fierce that day, and Abner and the men of Israel were beaten before the servants of David. We'll find out how badly later. And the three sons of Zeruiah were there. Joab, who I mentioned already, killer instinct. Abishai, anybody remember Abishai? If you remember Abishai, he's one of the guys that went with David when they found Saul and his spear and his water jug. And Abishai said, "Hey, I can pin this guy to the ground right here. Here's a spear. He's on the ground." And David said no. And Asahel was swift as a wild gazelle. And Asahel pursued Abner, and as he went, he turned neither to the right nor the left from following Abner. Abner looked at him and said, "Is it you, Asahel?" And he answered, "It is I." Abner was trying to get Asahel to leave because Abner is a tough old goat. But he refused to turn aside. Therefore, Abner struck him in the stomach with the butt of his spear, so the spear came out his back, fell there, and died where he was. And all came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died, stood still. But Joab and Abishai pursued Abner. "You can't kill my brother." This is a little bit like the Old West at this point. Then Abner called to Joab, "Shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know that the end will be bitter? How long will it be before you tell your people to turn from the pursuit of their brothers?" Joab said, "As God lives, if you had not spoken, surely the men would not have given up the pursuit of their brothers and until the morning." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the men stopped and pursued Israel no more, nor did they fight anymore. So Joab returned from the pursuit of Abner, and when he had gathered all the people together, there were missing from David's servants 19 men besides Asahel. So that's not too bad, 19 men. because 12 of them died at the pit, so 7 more people died. Service of David had struck down 360 of Abner's men. David's men were battle-hardened and been on the run. Remember, they had defeated the Amalekites, got back their stuff. They were very fierce warriors. And they took up Asahel and buried him in the tomb of his father, which was at Bethlehem, and Joab and his men marched all night, and the day broke on them in Hebron. So we see a little bit about here what happened. Here's where the battle happened. They pursued to Mahanaim on the other side, and then they marched all the way back overnight and buried Asahel. There was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David, and David grew stronger and stronger while the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. Then Abner was very angry over the words of Ishbosheth and said, "Am I a dog's head of Judah? To this day I keep showing steadfast love to the house of Saul, your father, to his brothers and to his friends, and have not given you into the hand of David. Yet you charge me today with a fault concerning a woman." What had happened? Well, Ishbosheth had gotten a little cheeky and had accused Abner of impropriety. And Abner wasn't having it. Abner, if it wasn't for Abner, Ishbosheth would be nobody. And so Abner says, "I'm withdrawing my support of you." And Abner sent messages to David on his behalf, saying, "To whom does the land belong? And make your covenant with me. And behold, my hand shall be with you to bring over all Israel to you." And he said, "Good, I will make a covenant with you, but one thing I require of you, that is that you shall not see my face until you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see my face." Now I say David wasn't bitter. There is a case that could be made that David was showing a little bit of resentment. Michal suddenly becomes Saul's daughter, and he does not really refer to her as his wife anymore. He refers to her as Saul's daughter. And I think the implication is obvious. Except this time, he does refer to her as his wife because he's referring to Ishbosheth, trying to be polite, because Ishbosheth, remember, is Michal's brother. And David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, "Give me my wife, Michal," blah, blah, blah. And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, Paltiel, the son of Laish. But her husband, this verse 16 just makes me tremendously sad. But her husband went with her, weeping with her, all the way to Bahurim. And Abner said to him, "Go, return." And he returned. He wasn't messing around with Abner. Abner was a pretty fierce fellow. And if Abner says go, you go. But poor Paltiel, he had been married to Michal for all these years while David was on the run. They had built a good life together. He loved Michal, clearly. But that was it. When Abner came with 20 men to David at Hebron, David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. And Abner said to David, "I will arise and go and gather all of Israel to the Lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may reign over all that your heart desires." So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. Sounds like a good plan. If you get the general of the other guy's army over, you're going to win the whole country. Then Joab went and to the king and said, "What have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why is it you have sent him away? So he's gone. You know that Abner, the son of Ner, has come to deceive you and to know you're going out and you're coming in and know all that you're doing." Did Joab trust anyone? Absolutely not. I mean, Joab's plan was to kill everyone he met unless he really liked you. When Joab came out from David's presence, he sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the cistern of Sirah. But David did not know about it. And when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the midst of the gate to speak with him privately, and there he struck him in the stomach so that he died, for the blood of Asahel, his brother. So what was Joab's motive? He wanted revenge against this guy. He did not want there to be any peace with Abner because he killed his brother, and that's just something he would not forgive. Afterward, when David heard of it, he said, "This is a little gross, I'm sorry, but I'm just going to throw it in there. I and my kingdom are forever guiltless before the Lord for the blood of Abner, the son of Ner. May it fall upon the head of Joab and upon all his father's house. May the house of Joab never be without one who has a discharge, who is leprous, or who holds a spindle, or who falls by the sword, who lacks bread. The interesting thing here is David is king. He could punish Joab. He could say, hey, you're not the commander of my army anymore. In truth, I think the truth of the matter is David was a little afraid of Joab. But he wanted to let Joab know, I really don't like you for what you did. The holding the spindle thing is exactly like it sounds like. It was like, you're going to have a girly man that, weaves, not a fighting man. And it was how David felt. Then David said to Joab and to all the people who were with him, tear your clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourn before Abner. King David followed up to the bier. They buried Abner at Hebron, and the king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner, and all the people wept. And the king lamented Abner, saying, should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. As one falls before the wicked, you have fallen. The punishment for Joab was to mourn Abner. It was a fitting punishment in that sense, although he could have done more. But here's the thing, whether it's in mourning or whether it's in times of uncertainty, it's in all of the songs, it's in all the Bible. There is a message of hope, and that is, but they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. That message is a message of endurance, that you can make it through the tough times, and you can come out with hope. The Lord cares about your suffering and your sorrow. The Lord cares about you, but we have to wait. Sometimes we have to wait, and we have to wait for the Lord, and we have to trust in the Lord. And that's really the point of the whole lesson here, is that those who wait on the Lord won't be disappointed, because he has something in store for you. It may not be what you think it is, but he will take care of you. You need to have to believe in that. Thank you very much. That's the end of the lesson. Next week, we're going to do 2 Samuel 4 through 9, 1 Chronicles 14 through 17. We'll try to get through this, and we'll have a couple of Solomon lessons. Thank you very much.